getting into Fire Emblem in 2019. Yay, 3 houses! Getting into Fire Emblem in 2013. Yay, Awakening! Getting into Fire Emblem in 2004. Whoa, Roy in Smash Melee is so cool! His sword explodes things with fire! That's okay, I guess. Wonder what game they're from. Fire Emblem Japan only. What kind of name is that? Oh hey, next month's issue of my local GBA review magazine is out. It says the makers of Advance Wars are working on a fantasy strategy game? I love Advance Wars!
I no longer have an arse, it's true. Fire Emblem kicked it. Kicked it far, far away. I can barely sit down now, but I don't mind. I've never been happier.
Well, that sounds good, and wait, Fire Emblem? Haven't I heard that name before? But I don't know, apparently once you lose a soldier, they're gone forever. Maybe this won't be my kind of game. Later that year, my birthday.
Do you have Pokemon Fire Red? It's for my son's birthday.
What's that? Fire Emblem? Yeah, we got that game! Whoa, I wasn't expecting to get this, but sure, I'll play it. And I played it. For the rest of the day. The rest is history. Once, dragons and men coexisted. They shared a peace forged in wisdom. A peace that lasted many generations. All that was lost when mankind disrupted this balance in a sudden onslaught. Man fought dragon in a savage war that shook the foundations of their world. This war was called the Scouring. Defeated and humbled, dragons vanish from the realm. In time, man rebuilt and spread his dominion across the land and onto the islands beyond. A millennium has passed since those dark days ended. And that was the first time people outside Japan ever saw this logo. Welcome everyone to Fire Emblem. Just Fire Emblem, officially in the West, but it's subtitled The Blazing Blade in Japanese, and that's what I'll be calling it for this playthrough. This is the first Fire Emblem game to be officially released outside Japan, and it's one with a very interesting reputation in the fan base now. See, back in the day, this game was obviously very highly regarded and was the point of comparison for every other game in the series to non-Japanese fans. But as the years went on and more games in the series came out, especially more beginner-accessible ones like Awakening, fans went back to it and started to reevaluate it in a very different light. Firstly, this game became the absolute darling of the hardcore fandom. It's only natural they try and test their skills in the first game they played, and so it gained a reputation as the ultra-elitist, low turn count paradise. And then its reputation shifted again when games like Awakening came out and the series advanced further, along with the hardcore players moving on to discover other much more difficult games like Fate's Conquest. At that point, this game came to be seen as a terrible game in both story and in gameplay, only held up by nostalgia. And then we come to now, and I'd like to look back and re-examine this game, because it's a very important one to the series, and it's one that's importance is kind of forgotten now because the vast majority of fans did not start with it. As somebody who did, I'd like to re-examine what I feel it did right, what I feel it did wrong, and how I believe that, despite not, being a perfect game, I still think it was an excellent starting point. And many, many fans would not be as into Fire Emblem as they are now if it weren't for this game. So, let's press start to begin, and as we start a new game, we'll be greeted with a screen that you won't actually see if you were an actual first-time player. So this is not a completely fresh file. The reason why I am doing this is one of the many reasons that I am doing a playthrough of this game, and that is that it has a ton of replay value and a ton of very hidden content that I would like to show off in this playthrough. First thing is this mode select option that you unlock after finishing the game once. On your first playthrough, you have no choice but to start with Lyn normal mode, going from prologue to chapter 10. This is sort of a mini prequel campaign to the rest of the story, where you are given many, many tutorials on the gameplay mechanics, many incredibly hand-holdy and forced tutorials, which I will get to, don't worry, and also are given a bit of a grace period for permadeath. Rather than the casual modes of later games turning it off entirely, this game's entry-level mode simply makes it so that for the first 10 chapters, characters who are lost will come back in Eliwood or Hector's story. However, this is not without consequence, and I will explain that eventually. After beating Lyn mode the first time, you are then forced into Eliwood normal mode, and that's the way the story will play out. But, on a second playthrough, you have the option to skip Lyn mode entirely and go straight to Eliwood. You can also play it on hard difficulty, though Eliwood hard is barely any different from normal. I'll explain how his difficulties work once we get to his story. Or play a new mode starring Hector. Now, for those used to the root splits of later games like Fates and Three Houses, this is not that. This is much more comparable to, I'd say, Pokemon Crystal version. It's the same overall story as Eliwood mode, but there are some exclusive scenes to Hector mode, and a couple of exclusive chapters, and 2 exclusive characters. This playthrough will be doing Hector mode because it's generally the mode that I prefer because it has more content, but I will be starting with Lyn mode. As for why I'm doing this, there are 2 main reasons. Lyn mode gives a lot of opportunities for a bunch of the cast to gain experience. If you skip this, not only will they miss out on this, but they'll also be treated as if they died in Lyn mode, and will start with only their default base stats in Eliwood and Hector, and this makes quite a few characters significantly less fun to use, in my opinion. And this is why I always play Lyn mode every time I do a playthrough of this game, which is surprisingly a hot take. I know a lot of people really hate it and would rather just jump straight to this, and a lot of analysis acts like Lyn mode doesn't exist, but I consider it a very important part of this game. If you want to get the experience from Lyn mode, but don't want the tutorials, Lyn hard mode is exactly the same as Lyn normal mode, except there are no tutorials. That's all there is to it. And I was originally considering playing on this difficulty, but I'm gonna go with normal, and this is reason 2 why I'm starting with Lyn. Part of why I wanted to do this playthrough was to examine this game's tutorials, talk about how they've aged, which many of them have not aged well, but also why I think the developers felt they were necessary back in the day. And on that note, let's begin.
Prepare yourself!
So let's start from this file. Enter information, yes or no. Now here's another difference that you get when you start the game after beating it once. In Lyn's story, you are forced to create a tactician, and this is a good thing because having a tactician is objectively better from a gameplay standpoint. They were essentially the series' first avatar, but they don't take part in combat. If you're starting with Eliwood or Hector's story, you have the option to not make a tactician, but like I said, this is objectively worse. I'll get into why once we start Eliwood and Hector's story, because the tactician doesn't actually have a gameplay purpose until then. So the tactician's default name is Mark, and that is the one that I'll be going with. Fun fact, this is also the Japanese name of Morgan in Fire Emblem Awakening. They are an intentional reference to this character. And in the English version, you have the option to select their birth month and their gender. This being a game from the 2000s, the only options are male and female. Gender has no mechanical effect. All it does is slightly change the way characters address you in dialogue. And there are actually very few playthroughs out there that use the female tactician, so I'm going to actually pick female. As for the birth month will affect that little icon next to the tactician's name. This is their affinity. Think of that like an astrological sign for this universe, except it actually does something. The tactician's affinity does have a gameplay benefits, but I'm gonna get into that, again, in Aylward and Hector's story, because it won't kick in until then. I'm going to be choosing a birth month for the tactician that has fire affinity because of reasons. This intro still gives me chills. Like, I'm gonna be getting nostalgic for this playthrough. Like, I'm not gonna be overlooking all this game's flaws, don't worry, but part of the reason for doing this was nostalgia. I owe a lot to this game. Obviously, it is my first ever Fire Emblem game. I would not be a fan of this series, and this channel would not exist in the way that it does if it weren't for this game. I also have a lot of nostalgia for the time that I got this game. I got it for my 13th birthday. I was technically still 12 at the time because my mum was going away on a business trip to another state, and my actual birthday fell during the trip, but I had the presents and celebration before we went on the trip, because at the time, I was still... It felt wrong to me if I had my birthday party away from home. And, you know, none of my school friends would have been able to come, so yeah. But I still remember, like this music, all of this, going through this, meeting Lynn for the first time, although, granted, Lynn doesn't quite have the same hold on me that she has for a lot of people. I know that Lynn was, like, a lot of Fire Emblem players' first waifu, and, on that note, I have something that is gonna horrify a lot of you. She's 15 in the Japanese version. Yeah, they actually upped her age to 18 in the English version, and I do like this. Not for weird reasons, but because I think she just makes more sense being 18. Now, one thing that I do really like about this game is that at least the main trio of characters have multiple different face portraits. They aren't just looking sideways all the time. They are portraits of looking forward, they are portraits of being angry or being sad. I think, like, it's subtle, but it adds quite a lot. Yep, guess what? It's bandits again! This is my first time ever fighting bandits in Fire Emblem. They're from the Burn Mountains, huh? So yeah, they're raiding the local villages, and Lynn, just on her own, is gonna go ahead and fight them. She thinks she can handle them on her own. This says quite a lot about her character. However, yeah, so to get used to a lot of these, huh? What's that, Mark? Oh, you're saying this. It's a lot like, you know, Paper Mario, the way they have Mario talk in those games. The Tactician is a totally silent character, but they have a little bit of, personality. That personality being they're a strategist, and that's about it. However, the main reason why Mark exists is to justify some tutorials! Yeah, so the thing about Lynn, like, protecting the tech... I'll talk about that later, but there was a support conversation in Fire Emblem Heroes with Lynn that gave me... It's a very interesting angle to that. So, here we go. Lynn is the blue unit. The enemy units are red. Mark, you are green. Essentially, battles consist of blue allied units and red enemy units taking turns moving on the field. You're only here as a strategist, Mark. You'll only appear during special events. Yep, no combat for the Tactician this time. You'll have to wait till Awakening for that. Your job as a strategist is to place the cursor on blue units and issue their orders. Select it. So, obviously, this is extremely rudimentary. This kind of assumes that you've never played a strategy game in your life before. But here's the thing, and this is what I think so many people who criticize this game's tutorials take for granted. Most people who played this game for the first time hadn't. It's very easy for veterans of the series to underestimate just how difficult Fire Emblem is to understand for a newcomer. And I'm not saying that these super hand-holdy tutorials are 100% justified, obviously. But what I am saying is I can understand the developer's mindset when they did this. Yeah, she needs to be closer to
the enemy!
Yeah, this was long before she became mimetic for that. You have selected Lynn. When a unit is selected, the map changes color, like so. Yes, you can move anywhere in the blue area. Does it tell you that the red area is her attack range? Probably does later. Place your cursor there and press A to finish. So, here's the thing that most people criticize about this game's tutorials. They straight up railroad you into specific moves. You are allowed almost no freedom at all. In fact, in this chapter, you have absolutely no freedom. Well, you have a very tiny, tiny bit of freedom. You'll see in a moment, but it's mostly just no freedom whatsoever. So, here comes the bandit! So yeah, now we have to close in an attack. Okay, I am allowed to do the options at least. So, animation, I'm gonna put this on 2 because I like seeing the backgrounds here. Let's do game speed on fast for the purposes of videos, and let's do fast text speed, I guess. Most of the rest of this stuff I like to leave on. Detail won't actually tell you if you can double an enemy, like, you kind of have to calculate it yourself. But, well, I'll go into that later. Everything else, yeah, I like to leave on. Window color... Okay, you know what, for Lynn's story, let's go with green window colors. I usually don't like to change the window color, but, yeah, this already looks weird to me. So, move to one of the areas adjacent to the bandit. This is the one place where you actually have freedom. You can choose any of these 4 squares. Yep, that's the only freedom you get in this tutorial. I guess I'll choose this one, because it feels like a little bit closer to the enemy. Select attack! So we have the Iron Sword here. We've got 9 attack, 3 crit, 106 hit, and 23 avoid. The game will not explain what any of this means. I don't think it ever explains what this means. I think it gives a basic explanation of stats, and that's about it. So we have the combat forecast here, which the game also isn't going to explain, but at least we get to see some flashy animations. This song is really good. I'm glad this song got into Smash Brothers eventually. And once you've taken your turn, so does
the enemy!
Unfortunately, Lynn got unluckily hit there. I say unluckily because that was not a 39% chance to hit. That was actually lower than 39. I'll pop up the actual number on screen. Something the tutorial won't explain to you, and I don't think any tutorial ever explains to you in the GBA games, is that this game actually rolls 2 random numbers out of 100. I think technically they were between 0 and 99, and averages them. And if the average is lower than your hit rate, then you hit. So what this essentially does is it skews hit rates towards hit rates above 50% hitting and hit rates below 50% missing. Which I actually like, because it means that, like, if you've got a hit rate below 50%, you probably have bad stats or terrain isn't in your favor, so you kind of deserve to miss more, whereas you're rewarded for getting your hit rate above 50% by doing the right things, like equipping a good weapon, fighting with an advantage in terms of the weapon triangle, which we'll get to later, or fighting with better terrain. So yeah, True Hit is an oddly controversial subject in this series. I personally really like True Hit. But a lot of the more modern Fire Emblems don't do this. They have like hybrid systems. It does make the game easier. Also interesting that Lynn's explaining a gur here. It's not a yurt. I believe yurt is not actually the correct term. So yeah, we're in Sakai right now. Sakai is, aesthetically it's very Mongolian, but in terms of how it's treated by the narrative, it's a cross between Mongolia and Native Americans in the US. You'll see the comparisons once we get later in Lynn's story. So yeah, Lynn has a vulnerary, or as I called it as a kid, a vulvanary. I mispronounced a lot of item names and weapon names in this game. I'll be explaining my favorite of them as I go through the playthrough. I mean, I'm surprised that I pronounced Lynn's name correctly. I didn't call her Line. I believe this is actually the first time that I heard the term brigand, which is just a fancy word for bandit. So yeah, this brigand by the Gur, his name is Barda, a Ganelon bandit called the Beast for his savagery. Fire Emblem fans know this guy. He's also, yeah, this is the brigand. Mighty mountaineers who prefer axes in combat. They can actually move over mountains. However, slight spoilers, you never actually get a playable brigand in this game, so you can't do that yourself until unless you were somehow able to get a promoted version that could cross, mountains and seas. Anyway, you're forced to go to one of these spaces here, and have Lynn attack. Now, here is a point where I have to fault the tutorial, because this is very bad. Normally, you would not want to have Lynn initiate this combat, because if she gets hit on the player phase, and gets hit again on the enemy's turn, she'll die, because she'll take 10 damage and then another 10 and she has less than 20 HP. But, you know, 40% under true hit, there's no way that's gonna happen, right? Okay. Do I give this guy a ridiculous Australian accent? You know what, I'm gonna do it. Who do you think you are? You think you can stand up to Barter the Beast? Oh, look at that, she got hit. I do like the blonde-haired palette that he has. Phew, he's tough. It all comes out to this next blow. Yeah, so even Lynn acknowledges that she could potentially die here, which is actually very true. And he heals a little bit from being on that Gur. Okay, now luckily he missed.
It's time to end
Even
this.
more luckily, Lynn gets a completely scripted 1% critical. Yeah, don't actually, like, this is where the tutorial is not teaching you how to play well. So already, bit of a mark against the tutorials here. But, you know, I still think this game has its charm regardless. And the tutorials will get better, don't worry. What? How did you? But I'll have the last laugh, you'll see. One day, I'll be reborn in a land called Fodlan. And there I shall become the most powerful bandit who ever lived! I'm sure that wasn't an ominous warning for the future or anything. No. We'll never be seeing that guy again. But yeah, that was indeed very close. Sorry if I worried you. Oh no, don't blame yourself. Blame the tutorial for forcing you to engage in a combat that could have killed you. Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, Lynn gains experience in each encounter. When she has enough experience, she will level up. Now, the cool thing about Fire Emblem is that every level up is always 100 experience. It's just the higher your level compared to the enemy, the less experience you get from them. As she increases in level, her abilities improve. Over time, she'll grow much stronger. Game, are you going to actually talk about what those abilities are or how they work? It's time to begin. I forget if the game actually ever does explain how stats work, and that's one kind of failing point of this tutorial, because, that's kind of important, so I'm gonna do it for them. At least you press the R button, by the way, to get the detailed description tier. So, at least these give a little bit of description. So, unlike in future games, characters only have either strength or magic, not both at the same time. So it's strength for physical attackers, magic for magic users. I refer to this stat as attack, for the sake of consistency, like Fire Emblem Heroes. So this is added to your weapon's attack power, and then the enemy's defense is subtracted to determine how much damage you do. Skill. So this doesn't fully explain how this works. This does improve your hit percent, but it also slightly affects your critical percent. Speed, this is true, but by attacks, it means that if you have 4 or more speed higher than the target, you will attack twice. Speed is also impacted by this stat, Constitution. Affects rescues, the game doesn't actually tell you the more important aspect of Constitution, arguably, and that is that it affects your speed, determined by your weapon's weight as well. So, this Iron Sword has 5 weight, Lynn has 5 con, so she's not weighed down by it. If, let's say, the Iron Sword had 6 weight, her speed would actually be 9. Because your speed goes down by 1 point for every point that the weapon's weight exceeds your con. And this also affects your speed calculation for the purposes of evasion. People like to call your speed after applying weight attack speed. Luck, this affects many different things. It's simpler than the game makes it out to be. So every point of luck reduces the enemy's critical hit chance by 1. Also, luck affects evasion, but less than speed does. It does not affect accuracy though. Defense reduces damage from physical attacks, that is by swords, axes, lances, and bows, while resistance reduces damage from magic attacks, which is, we'll be seeing magic later, we don't have to worry about that for a while. We also have movement. Lynn having 5 is kind of bad for this game, for reasons that I'll explain shortly. And aid is for foot units, it's 1 lower than your constitution. If you have equal to or greater aid than an ally's con, you can rescue them. Rescuing will be explained, I think, later? It's been a little while since I did these tutorials, and I wanted to react to them blind for this playthrough. This is, if you're rescuing somebody, affinity determines the bonuses you get from supports, which don't exist in Lyn mode, and condition, Lyn is feeling healthy right now. Also below that B4W2, that's only unlocked after beating the game once, and it shows that she has fought 4 times and killed 2 things, giving her an actual combat rating of 50%. That's relevant for rankings later on, but as usual, I'm getting ahead of myself. Lyn's class is Lord, and she also has an HP stat. If HP goes there, yeah, it's funny. This says loses consciousness. This game tried to pretend that units didn't die if they were killed, but, well, later on it's very obvious that people die. Which is kind of funny. Also, every weapon has durability, and when it goes down to 0, the weapon will break. This is something that actually did kind of weird out a lot of players who were getting into Fire Emblem for the first time. I think the tutorial does go into it later. We also have a weapon rank, which determines what kind of weapons that you can wield. This goes up every time you fight an enemy, and when that meter next to it fills up, you go to the next letter, so you'll go from D to C in Lyn's case. The Iron Sword is E-ranked, and honestly, Lyn's sword rank doesn't actually matter all that much for reasons that will become apparent in a few chapters. Speaking of Lyn, now we know what the stats do, let's go over Lyn herself, which is something that I'm sure a lot of people have been looking forward to for reasons.
I'll protect you no matter what. Just stick close to me.
Whenever a character levels up, they have a percentage chance out of 100 to gain a point in each of the main stats. These are the character's growth rates, and I'll have them in a chart at the center of each bio. Random growths mean there can be some inconsistency across playthroughs in unit performance, but it also adds to the replay value. What is consistent is each character's starting values for every stat, and those I've listed in the chart at the bottom. But for Lyn mode characters, things get a bit complicated. Because if you don't play Lyn mode, only possible on a second or subsequent playthrough, all of its characters have default base stats for when they join in Eliwood and Hector mode. These are also the values they get reset to if they die in Lyn mode, though that's not possible for Lyn herself since she's a game over condition. But for everyone else, it's important to remember that quote-unquote dying in the tutorial is not consequence-free, and the game doesn't explain this. Every character also has starting weapon ranks, and these may change if they get the default Eliwood and Hector stats, as well as an affinity, which is used to calculate the bonuses they get by supporting other characters, though supports aren't a thing in Lyn mode, so don't worry about that yet. Because you should be worrying about Lyn herself. Lyn, I like to describe as the Charizard of Fire Emblem. She's extremely popular for nostalgic reasons, but her actual gameplay performance in her debut game is not great. And sadly, it's not really Lyn's fault. Let me explain. Lyn, as a unit in a vacuum, has very high skill speed and decent luck. She's also locked to swords, but gets a personal weapon after a few chapters that has a high critical ratio, as well as an effectiveness bonus against armors and cavalry. So Lyn's intended role is as somebody who can consistently double attack, dodge, and get critical hits. And here's where the problem lies. None of those assets are useful in Blazing Blade, and that's for one simple reason. Blazing Blade's enemies are weak and slow. You don't need a lot of speed to double them. You don't need a lot of evasion to dodge them, nor do you need to rely on evasion at all as they don't hit hard, and you don't need crits to kill them. And with that, none of Lyn's advantages matter, while all her disadvantages do. She doesn't have a horse, Heroes was a long way off, so her movement is low, and swords are weak, lack decent ranged options, and see weapon triangle disadvantage frequently as most enemies use lances. But don't worry if you like Lyn as a character, this game is easy enough that you can really use anyone you want. Just note that she'll struggle to one-round kill enemies later on with her lower strength and weak swords, and will need rescue dropping to keep up with the rest of your army. Speaking of which, she has fairly low con, which makes it easier for her to be rescue dropped by the rest of your army, but also means she can't use heavier blade-type swords without a speed penalty, when she'd really appreciate their extra power. One of the things I hate about this game's con system is it doesn't increase when leveling up. The only way to boost it is by promoting or using the extremely rare body ring item. And both options may be difficult to justify on Lyn. She does promote with an item that you get in Chapter 24 of Eliwood's story or 26 of Hector's. That's not that close to the end of the game, by the way. This is quite a long Fire Emblem. But this item could also go to either Eliwood or Hector depending on story, and they're both arguably better candidates for it than Lyn is. Here's another problem too. If you're doing a ranked playthrough, you shouldn't promote Lyn, as doing so will massively murder your funds ranking. I hate that this is a thing, but it is indeed a thing. But if you do use this item on Lyn when she's level 10 or above, she gets +3 to her strength, as well as a pretty sizable resistance and defense boost, more movement, and a D rank in bows. Again, this isn't heroes, so she doesn't become a mounted archer, and bows aren't great in this game, for reasons I will explain in thorough detail in a few chapters, so this isn't that big of a bonus. But it's another reason why Lyn is just trapped in the wrong environment. If she was in a game where, hypothetically, enemies were harder to double, were bulky enough that crits mattered, was scary enough that chip damage from bows mattered, and this game also happens to have a lot of enemy wyverns that really need bows to take down, she was born 20 years too soon. Okay, so let's cure ourselves of that depression by seizing the gate. The game doesn't actually explain this, but only the protagonist can seize. And unlike in other games, seize is not the only victory condition. But yeah, now that the fighting is done, can have a little bit more of a conversation with Lyn. Yeah, we didn't even do anything. You did all the work there. Yeah, see, that line is kind of funny. In a lot of ways, this game is designed assuming that you've played Advance Wars, which is something that many Fire Emblem fans these days would not understand whatsoever. But back in the day, most Fire Emblem fans started as Advance Wars fans, and there are a lot of Advance Wars influences in this game specifically, which I'll go over once we get to them. It's just kind of sad that the Advance Wars series has just really fallen by the wayside, and even the remake didn't really improve its notability that much. I'm a rare defender of the remake. I just love Advance Wars a lot. So, oh, right, sad conversation here, yeah, so Lyn already has some beef with bandits. They massacred her entire tribe in the past, including her parents. Huh. So yeah, Lyn has been living alone for most of her life, it seems. And suddenly, happy music again. This is Lyn's theme, by the way. I think it's called A Girl of the Plains. So yeah, Lyn wants to get stronger to avenge her father's death, apparently. That's our starting point for this story, but things are gonna get a little more complicated soon. So yeah, just a pretty standard inciting incident. We're going on a hero's journey to make Lyn stronger. In a way, that's kind of a benefit of Lyn mode. I like playing it because it gives Lyn more experience, even though, you know, most people think that she doesn't need it, doesn't deserve it rather, but still. My master strategist, I'll be your peerless warrior! At least until I get some cavalry, but rip. Travel with Lyn, Mark. Give her your aid and master the art of combat. complete the tasks set out in each chapter, which are not always C's, and help Lynn in her quest. Turn the instruction window on or off by pressing select. You might think that's giving the option to turn off tutorials, but it's not. So, yeah. Overall rating for the tutorials in this chapter, very hand-holdy, and they get even more hand-holdy later on. But, like, you know, I can give them a bit of a pass because it is very hard to get into Fire Emblem, and they really wanted this to be an entry-level game. So, now that we have taken our first steps on our journey, I'll see you next time where Lynn meets some new allies.